Coming up on the Packers report, we got a new report from Ian Rapoport on the edge rusher Maxx Crosby. Could he be on his way to Green Bay? And if he is, on the back half, we're going to talk about how the Packers can make that happen. Welcome into the show, everybody. Really appreciate you guys tuning in. I got to update you on our NFC North sub-battle. We've made it really, really close with our Bears Now channel. Only 3 subs behind them. We're pulling away from Vikings, pulling even further away from Lions. So to take over that number 1 spot in the NFC, you guys need to help me out and hit that sub button. Ian Rapoport lists the Packers as a possible destination for star edge rusher Maxx Crosby. And this wasn't one of those articles where they talk about a trade candidate and then they list out like 5 or 6 possible places that guy could go. No, and in an article from Ian Rapoport, he talks about Maxx Crosby and then calls out the Packers by name. Here's what he had to say. While the hiring of Super Bowl winner Pete Carroll was a step towards stability, the Raiders still don't have a franchise quarterback and have a ton of work to do to field a competitive roster. Trading Crosby for a bounty of picks would be one way to expedite that process, and Crosby might welcome the change, particularly if it's to a playoff team where he knows people, example, Green Bay. And I love the fact that right off the bat, the one example that Rapoport gave in that article was the Green Bay Packers, right? It's not this list of teams and these lists of franchises and these lists of coaches that Maxx Crosby is somewhat familiar with or knows guys on that team, knows guys in that front office. No, only the Packers. I love the fact that he's calling Green Bay out name, and it makes me wonder if there might be something brewing or if there's some kind of possibility that this might happen sometime in the near future. But what say you guys? Should the Packers trade for Maxx Crosby? Let me know in the comment section down below by giving me a Y for yes and an N for no. Let me know right now. So I've got a couple of reasons why it might happen. Number 1, let's talk about this from a Green Bay perspective. The Packers need an edge rusher. And this isn't just a want, guys. This is a need. We all saw every single game this last season. We all saw that there was flashes, right? You look at the sack total and you might ask me, Joey, why are you even talking about this? Look at this team's sack number. But then if you look at the stats of how often they pressured quarterbacks on every downs, that's when you see that something needs to change. And so starting off the top of the show and off the top of this list of why this might happen, number 1, it's because the Packers need it to happen. The Packers need an edge rusher. Okay, now let's talk about the Maxx Crosby side of things. It's his 5th head coach in his 7-year career with the Las Vegas Raiders. Okay, technically, he's only played 6 seasons, and yet this is his 5th head coach. Okay, and if you're a player of that caliber, you believe you belong on a Super Bowl winning team, on a Super Bowl winning roster, and you have that much instability in your short 7-year career, 5 head coaches, you got to want out, okay? And then also, that takes me to number 3, is the Raiders are really far away from competing, okay? They're nowhere close to competing for championships, competing for Super Bowls. Hell, they're not even close to competing for their own division, in my opinion. Okay? And you got a new head coach in there, like Ian Rapoport said, with Pete Carroll. You got a new general manager. And sure, they don't want to be excommunicated from everybody else. They don't want to be cast aside if they make that crazy of a move. But if you're planning on some type of a rebuild, you need picks to rebuild a franchise, especially when you're rebuilding it from the ground up like the Raiders are doing. And so, you know who can get you picks? Maxx Crosby, if he goes on the open market. Because look at what he's been able to do. Just in 12 games this year, 45 tackles, 17 of those for loss, 7.5 sacks, 20 quarterback hits, and 5 pass breakups. And I talked about it just a little bit ago, but this Packers defense, man, in the moment you needed it to come alive the most on the entire season, wild card, Philadelphia, they just flat out did it. Okay? 0 quarterback hits, 2 sacks, 2 tackles for loss, and Jalen Hurts had 3.24 seconds to throw every drop back. If you're wondering what 3.24 seconds look like in the pocket, it's this. Boom. Deliver a strike. Because they didn't have a guy like Maxx Crosby on that defensive line. I guarantee you, and I know this is, I don't even know if this is 2020 hindsight. This is just a flat-out hypothetical. But if Maxx Crosby was on that defensive line, things would have been different. I'm not saying you win the game, but he gives you a better chance to win the game. Okay? And then the last part of this is he's got no more guaranteed money left with Las Vegas in his contract. And if you look at his contract, honestly, those are high numbers. But for the player that you're getting, in my opinion, this is incredibly worth it. Okay? In 2024, he was a $30 million cap hit on a $24.5 million base salary. In 2025, $28 million cap hit, $22.2 million base. And then 2026, that number goes down even a bit more, $24.8 million cap hit on an $18.8 million base. Now, this does do a good bit of damage to the cap space that you have remaining. It lessens it, or I guess it throws it down to about $14 million if my quick math is correct. But all that tells you right now is you've got $42 million right now. $42 million. And a guy like Maxx Crosby on your cap hit would be around 28. And so, if Goody wants it to happen, it can happen. You've got the money for it. Okay? You've got the draft picks. You've got the trade assets. You have the ability to make it happen. This is just up to Brian Gutekunst. And if he wants it to happen. And also, the Raiders have to want to happen too. You know, it takes two to tango. So coming up, how the Packers can make this happen. How Goody can make this happen. We'll go through a little bit of trade scenarios. And then if it doesn't, I'll tell you some edge rushers I'm still pretty interested in this offseason. Before we do that, if you want Maxx Crosby to be a Packer, let me know down below by hitting that thumbs up button, okay? Let me know by hitting the thumbs up button, liking today's video, so that way I can get a pulse of the franchise. So for starters, Maxx Crosby would have to force a trade, okay? If he doesn't, I don't think there's any chance in the world that this happens. I think he's too precious to that franchise. I think he's too precious to that fan base. I think he's too precious to Mark Davis. Because Mark Davis, back in October around the trade deadline, said in an email, quotes, "We are not trading Maxx Crosby before or after the trade deadline." Then he went ahead and threw on 3 exclamation marks just so, you knew he wasn't messing around. So what if they do trade him, okay? What if Maxx Crosby forces their hand and says, "I will not be playing unless I get traded"? Well, this is what it could look like. A 2025 first-round pick, you're right now sitting at number 23, a 2026 first-round pick, and then a 2026 fifth-round pick, okay? So your next 2 first-rounders and then next year's fifth-rounder, and you get Maxx Crosby in return. And I know this is crazy. I know this sounds like a lot, but I would do this without even blinking an eye. I would do this without even thinking twice. And you ask me why? Why not any kind of thought on this? Why just reckless, you know what, let's do it, let's get it going? Because we saw on Sunday night and Super Bowl Sunday that when you have a pass rush that is elite in the National Football League, that is elite in the postseason, you can beat anybody you play. Sunday night, pass rush for the Eagles against Mahomes, 0 blitzes, yet they caused 26 pressures, 6 sacks, and a 42.9% pressure percentage. And Jack, can you do me a favor and throw up that list 4 stat of what Green Bay did against Philly? So last night against Mahomes, 0, 26 pressures, 2 sacks, and a 46.9% pressure rating. And against Philly, in the postseason, not a single quarterback hit. Just 2 tackles for loss. 3.24 seconds in time to throw. And then you look even deeper, right? They didn't just do it one game. They didn't just do it in the Super Bowl. They've been doing it all postseason long. 92 pressures in 4 games, 15 sacks in 4 games, and a 54.4% pass rush win rate. Defense wins you championships, and in this league, if you have a great pass rush, if you have a game-changing pass rush, that wins you championships as well. Okay, so getting Maxx Crosby in here, I don't care if it costs you 2 firsts and a 5th. You do it because you believe that this team, with Jordan Love, with Josh Jacobs, and with the other pieces around on that defensive side of the football, that this team is just one edge rusher away from competing for a Super Bowl. You might not believe that, but I do. So do anything you can to get Maxx Crosby in Green Bay. If you can't do it, though, let's talk about some free agent targets I think would be a good fit. Okay, I think Josh Sweat from the Eagles, funny enough, he had a fantastic game. 2 sacks against Mahomes on Sunday. I think he would be a fantastic addition in free agency. I don't think he'd be incredibly expensive either. Number 2, a guy who's a little bit older, but I think has some still solid and really high upside. That's Khalil Mack, okay? Those 2 guys, while they wouldn't be crazy expensive, they would still cost you some money. And if that's not something you want to spend on, maybe you want to spend some draft picks on it. Here are my 3 favorite draft targets for edge rushers. Number 1, Adam Marshall, Mike Green. We've already talked about him. We talked about him about what? I think it was a week ago, exactly yesterday. We talked about him last Monday on the Mel Kiper mock draft. James Pierce Jr. If he falls to 23, that's a guy I would take without blinking, okay? And then Jack Sawyer. 23 might be a little bit of a reach. He was the first-round pick in my Sunday mock draft. I think he's probably going to go somewhere 25 to 28. But still, those are my 3 favorite draft targets in terms of edge rushers. So how do you think the Green Bay Packers add when it comes to edge rushers over this offseason? Because we know that they need to. Do they do it by the draft? Do they do it by free agency? Or do they trade for one? Let me know in the comment section down below. Thanks so much for tuning in. As always, really do appreciate every single one of you guys. We're growing like crazy right here on the Packers Report, and if you want to be a part of it, make sure that sub button.